A broke single mother gives her last piece of bread to a shabby man on a park bench, unaware he is the city's most reclusive billionaire testing the kindness of strangers. "This money is fake," the maid's little daughter said to the billionaire, and his next move stunned all. The rain hammered down on the thin apartment window like 1,000 desperate fists, relentless and wild, each drop a tiny accusation against the flimsy glass. Alara watched the rivulets race each other down the pane, her own reflection a pale, hollow-eyed ghost superimposed over the dreary cityscape, a face etched with a weariness that went far deeper than her bones. She was so tired. The cold of the small room seemed to seep into her very soul, a biting, persistent chill that no amount of threadbare blankets could ever truly banish. It was the cold of unpaid bills piled high on the rickety kitchen table, the cold of a future that felt as gray and unforgiving as the November sky. She drew her worn cardigan tighter around her shoulders, a gesture that offered little warmth but provided a fragile sense of holding herself together. Her heart, a dull, aching stone in her chest, thudded with the slow, heavy rhythm of despair. In the corner of the room, her 5-year-old daughter, Lily, slept soundly in a small cot, her small face serene and innocent, untroubled by the wolves of poverty scratching at their door. A soft, golden glow from a single flickering lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the small space feel both like a sanctuary and a cage. The gentle, rhythmic sound of Lily's breathing was the only thing that kept the roaring silence of her own anxiety at bay. Looking at her daughter, a fierce, protective love surged through Alara, a force so powerful it momentarily eclipsed the exhaustion. It was for Lily that she endured, for Lily that she worked her fingers raw cleaning the cavernous, sterile mansion of Mrs. Deidre Blackwood, a woman whose heart was as cold and polished as her marble floors. It was for Lily that she would face another day, another condescending remark, another reminder of her lowly place in the world. She would do anything to protect that innocent sleep. A quiet resolve settled over her. She would not break. Her husband, Mark, had been gone for a year now, taken by a sudden, cruel illness that had devoured their meager savings and left behind a mountain of crushing medical debt. His memory was a tender, raw wound that still ached with a profound sense of loss. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she would reach for his side of the bed, her fingers meeting only the cold, empty sheets. The grief was a constant, unspoken companion. She missed his quiet chuckle, the steady warmth of his hand in hers, the unwavering belief in his eyes that they could weather any storm together. Now she was the only captain of their sinking ship. Her job as a maid paid barely enough to cover the rent on their tiny apartment, let alone the threatening letters that arrived with alarming frequency. Each morning, she would put on her uniform, a crisp but ill-fitting garment that felt like a costume of subservience, and paint a serene, dignified smile on her face. She taught Lily that kindness was their greatest treasure, a currency that never lost its value. She would share their last piece of bread with a stray cat, or spend her one free hour reading stories to the elderly woman next door. These small acts of selflessness were her rebellion against the cruelty of her circumstances. They were a testament to the fact that while the world could strip her of her money and her security, it could not touch the purity of her spirit. She moved from the window to the small kitchenette, her movements slow and deliberate. She opened the cupboard, its contents sparse and depressing. A half-empty box of pasta, a few tins of beans, and a small bag of rice. Enough for a few more days if she was careful. She began to prepare a simple meal, the familiar motions a small comfort in the chaos of her life. She was a virtuous sufferer, trapped in a cycle of hardship, but her spirit remained an unflinching flame in the darkness. She did not know it yet, but the universe was watching. A single, unsolicited act of kindness was about to set in motion a chain of events that would shatter her world, only to rebuild it into something more beautiful than she could ever have imagined. Everything was about to change. The day had been particularly grueling. Mrs. Blackwood had been in a foul temper, finding fault with every polished surface, every straightened cushion. Her words, sharp and dripping with disdain, had followed Alara all day. "Honestly, girl, do you even know what clean means? My standards are clearly beyond your comprehension. Elara had simply nodded, her expression impassive, her dignity a silent, impenetrable shield against the woman's venom. She had scrubbed floors until her knees ached and polished silver until her own reflection stared back at her, a stranger with haunted eyes. Now, walking home through the city park, the biting wind felt like a slap in the face. Lily's small hand was a warm anchor in hers, her cheerful chatter about a squirrel she'd seen a stark contrast to the heavy silence in Elara's heart. The sky was a bruised purple, and the last vestiges of daylight were fading fast. The park was mostly empty, the few remaining souls hurrying towards the warmth of home. That's when she saw him. He was sitting on a lone bench near the frozen duck pond, a solitary figure hunched against the cold. He wasn't dressed like the other destitute men who sometimes sought refuge in the park. His coat was of a fine, dark wool, and his shoes, though scuffed, were clearly expensive. But it was his posture that caught her attention. He seemed folded in on himself, his shoulders slumped under an invisible, unbearable weight. His gaze was fixed on the murky water of the pond, but he wasn't really seeing it. His eyes were hollow, vacant, like two dark windows to a shattered soul. He looked utterly, completely alone, a man adrift in a sea of profound grief. Elara's first instinct was to hurry past, to shield Lily from such a stark display of sorrow. It was not her place to intrude. But then she saw the subtle tremor in his hands, the way he clenched and unclenched his fists as if trying to hold onto something that had long since splintered into dust. Her heart, already so full of its own aches, felt a pang of raw, undeniable empathy. She recognized that brand of loneliness. It was a mirror of her own. Lily, with the unfiltered perception of a child, tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy, that man looks so sad," she whispered, her voice full of sincere concern. "He looks sadder than my rainy day drawing." Before Elara could respond, Lily let go of her hand and reached into the tiny pocket of her coat. She pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper, a crayon drawing she had made earlier that week. On it, she had drawn a large, wobbly circle with a smiling face, colored a bright, cheerful yellow. Around the edge, she had written in her clumsy, 5-year-old script, 100 kindness coin. Elara froze. It was a game they played. When they had no money for a treat, Elara would draw these kindness coins and tell Lily they were more valuable than real money, because you could spend them on making someone smile, which was the best purchase of all. It was a simple fiction born of poverty, a way to shield her daughter from the harsh reality of their situation. Seeing Lily hold that piece of paper, her small face set with a look of determined purpose, Elara felt a wave of internal hesitation. Should she stop her? The man was a stranger. He was probably a wealthy man having a bad day, a man who wouldn't appreciate being bothered by a poor woman and her child. But then she looked at his face again, at the deep, haunted lines of grief, and her hesitation vanished, replaced by the quiet, unwavering voice of her own conscience. This was what she had taught her daughter. This was the core of their belief system. Kindness was their only true wealth. She gave Lily a gentle nod. The child, emboldened, walked slowly towards the bench. Her small footsteps were almost silent on the path. She stood before the man for a moment, waiting patiently until he seemed to notice her presence. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes shifting from the pond to the small girl standing before him. His expression was one of weary confusion. Lily held out the crumpled drawing. "This is for you," she said, her voice clear and pure in the cold air. "So you won't be so sad." The man, Alistair Sterling, simply stared. He stared at the child's unflinching, innocent gaze, and then at the colorful drawing offered in her small hand. His mind, which usually moved at lightning speed, processing billion-dollar deals and complex market analyses, went completely blank. For the past 3 years, ever since the accident that had claimed his wife and son, the world had been a muted, gray landscape of transactions and obligations. He had forgotten what genuine, selfless human connection felt like. It was a foreign language he no longer understood. He reached into his own coat pocket automatically, his fingers closing around a crisp, $100 bill. It was a reflex, the only way he knew how to interact with the world. Through money. He pulled it out and offered it to the girl. "Thank you." His voice was a rough and used rasp. "Please, take this for your trouble." Lily looked at the bill in his hand and then shook her head. Her little brow furrowed in confusion. She pointed a small finger at the real money. "This money is fake," she stated with the simple, unwavering certainty of a child. Then, she pointed to her own crayon drawing, now resting in his palm. "This one is real. Mommy says so." A seismic shock went through Alistair. The child's words, so innocent and yet so profound, splintered the thick wall of ice that had encased his heart for years. Fake. Real. In that single, sacred moment, the entire foundation of his cynical, grief-stricken world cracked. He looked from the child to the woman standing a few feet away, her face etched with a gentle, apologetic expression. Their eyes met across the cold expanse of the park. In her gaze, he saw no pity, no expectation, only a deep, quiet understanding. It was a look that saw past the billionaire, past the expensive coat, and directly into the hollow, shattered core of the man. Alara gave a small, nervous smile and called her daughter back. "Come, Lily. We must let the gentleman be." They turned and walked away, melting back into the twilight, leaving Alistair sitting on the bench, a crisp $100 bill in one hand and a crumpled crayon drawing in the other. He stared at the drawing, at the smiling yellow sun. A single, hot tear, the first he had shed in years, traced a path down his cheek. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. He was no longer adrift. He had a new purpose. He had to find them. The brief encounter in the park left an indelible mark on Alara, though she could not have articulated why. The man's profound sadness had lingered with her, a somber echo in the quiet corners of her mind. The detour, however, had made them late. By the time they reached their small apartment, the warmth from Lily's hand had long since faded, replaced by the familiar, biting cold that seemed to live in the building's very walls. She hurried Lily through her bath and into bed, reading her a story until the child's breathing evened out into the soft rhythm of sleep. Only then did Alara allow the mask of maternal strength to fall away. The exhaustion of the day washed over her in a suffocating wave. She sat at the kitchen table, the stack of bills a menacing white tower in the dim light. A new letter had arrived that day, its red ink screaming final notice. It was for the last of Mark's hospital stays, a sum so astronomical it felt like a cruel joke. Her meager wages from Mrs. Blackwood were a handful of sand against a tidal wave of debt. A sob caught in her throat, a dry, painful sound. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes, trying to force back the tears. Crying wouldn't help. Crying wouldn't pay the bills or put food on the table. She had to be strong. For Lily. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her quiet resolve hardening once more into a fragile shield. The next morning, she arrived at the Blackwood mansion 10 minutes early, her face a carefully composed mask of serene efficiency. She needed this job. She could not afford a single misstep. Mrs. Blackwood, however, seemed to have woken up with a renewed sense of viciousness. She trailed Alara from room to room, her criticism a constant, dripping poison. "The dust on this mantelpiece is simply unacceptable. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" she'd hissed, running a white-gloved finger over a surface Alara had polished not an hour before. "And this rug is crooked. Do you have any eye for detail whatsoever?" Alara merely murmured apologies, her voice steady and low, and corrected the imaginary flaws. She moved through the vast, silent rooms like a ghost, her presence tolerated but never truly acknowledged. The mansion was a museum of wealth, filled with ornate furniture, priceless art, and gleaming surfaces, but it was utterly devoid of warmth or life, felt as hollow as its owner's heart. The separation from the sad man in the park was absolute. He was a fleeting moment, a brief, poignant connection in a life defined by hardship and isolation. She thought of him occasionally, hoping he had found some measure of peace, but he was a stranger, a ghost from another world. Her own world, with its immediate and brutal realities, demanded all of her attention. She had no space for daydreams or what-ifs. Her focus was singular: survive. Meanwhile, in a sleek, minimalist penthouse office overlooking the entire city, Alistair Sterling was a man transformed. The hollow-eyed ghost from the park bench was gone, replaced by a figure of commanding energy. The grief was still there, a deep, underlying ache, but it was no longer a paralyzing fog. It was now fuel. He had mobilized the full, formidable power of his resources, not for a corporate takeover, but for a deeply personal mission: to find the woman and child who had handed him a piece of paper and, in doing so, had handed him back a reason to live. His top private investigator, a man accustomed to tracking down international fugitives and uncovering corporate espionage, was now tasked with finding a maid and her 5-year-old daughter based on a vague description and a location in a public park. Within hours, he had results. Alara Jensen, widow, crushing medical debt. A daughter named Lily, employed by one Deidre Blackwood. The information was laid out in a crisp, sterile file on Alistair's vast obsidian desk. He read through the details of her life, and with each word, the awe he had felt in the park deepened into a profound respect, mingled with a cold, simmering anger at the injustice of her situation. This woman, who possessed a spirit of such pure, selfless generosity, was being slowly crushed by the weight of a world that valued money above all else. He saw the final notice from the hospital, a scanned copy in the file, and a muscle in his jaw clenched. This would not stand. He made a call to the CFO of his largest philanthropic foundation. The instructions were simple, quiet, and absolute. "There is a medical account for a Mark Jensen at City General Hospital," he said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "The outstanding balance is to be settled in full by the foundation. It is to be registered as an anonymous grant for a deserving family. There will be no paper trail leading back to me. Is that understood?" The payment was made within the hour. It was the first step. He then arranged for a series of other anonymous interventions. A grocery store gift card for $1,000 appeared in Alara's mailbox, tucked inside a plain envelope with a simple, typed note from an anonymous well-wisher. "We hope this helps." An envelope containing cash to cover 3 months' rent was slipped under her door, with no note at all. Alara's reaction was one of stunned disbelief. She held the gift card in her trembling hands, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. She looked up at the stained ceiling of her apartment, whispering a prayer of thanks to a universe she had begun to believe had forgotten her. She thought it was a miracle, a random act of grace from a benevolent stranger. She had no idea that her quiet guardian, the sad man from the park, was watching over her from a distance, meticulously and silently dismantling the walls of her desperation, one anonymous act of kindness at a time. He was her hidden savior, patiently waiting for the right moment to step out of the shadows. Alistair knew that anonymous charity was not enough. It could solve her financial problems, but it couldn't heal the deeper wounds of loneliness and grief he had seen in her eyes, wounds that so closely mirrored his own. He felt an undeniable pull towards her, a need to see her again, to speak with her, to exist in the quiet, dignified space she created around herself. He couldn't simply summon her to his office. That would be a crude display of power, turning their sacred, pure encounter into a transaction. It had to feel natural, like fate. He began to frequent the small, quiet cafe near her apartment building, a place with a warm, amber hue and the gentle scent of coffee and old books. He would sit by the window with a newspaper he never read, waiting. For 3 days he saw nothing. On the 4th, as a soft snow began to fall, dusting the city in a blanket of white, he saw her. She was walking down the street, a small bag of groceries in her arms, her face pale from the cold. Her gaze was distant, lost in thought. His heart gave a strange, unfamiliar lurch. He took a steadying breath, folded his newspaper, and stepped out of the cafe, timing his exit to intersect with her path. "Excuse me," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "Alara Jensen?" She stopped, her eyes widening in surprise as she recognized him. He was no longer the disheveled, broken man from the park bench. He was dressed in an impeccable cashmere coat, his face clean-shaven, his posture exuding a quiet, commanding confidence. But his eyes were the same. They held the same depth, the same echo of a profound sorrow. But now, there was a light in them, a gentle warmth that hadn't been there before. "Yes," she answered, her voice barely a whisper. I remember you." From the park, a small, sincere smile touched Alistair's lips. "I was hoping you would. I never had the chance to properly thank you. Or, more accurately, to thank your daughter." He gestured towards the cafe. "Would you allow me to buy you a cup of tea? To warm up? It's the least I can do." Alara hesitated. Her world and the world this man clearly inhabited were galaxies apart. But there was a sincerity in his gaze, a gentle plea that was impossible to refuse. She nodded. Inside, they sat at a small, secluded table. The soft hush of the cafe enveloped them, creating an intimate island in the middle of the bustling city. He ordered them both tea, and for a few moments, they sat in a comfortable silence, the unspoken connection from the park still humming between them. "Your daughter," Alistair began, his voice low, "she did something remarkable for me that day. She gave me hope. At a time when I thought there was none left in the world." He looked down at his hands, wrapped around the warm teacup. "I lost my family a few years ago. My wife, my son." He didn't elaborate on the details, but the raw grief in those few words was a confession in itself. "I've been adrift. Your daughter's kindness was the first lighthouse I've seen in a very long time." Alara's heart ached for him. She saw past the expensive coat and saw the grieving husband and father. She felt the powerful, invisible bond of shared loss forging between them. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with genuine empathy. "I lost my husband last year. I understand that emptiness." She shared a little about Mark, about his laughter and his strength, her voice cracking with emotion. He listened with an unwavering, steady gaze, his eyes never leaving her face. He made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in a very long time. It wasn't just a shared tragedy that bonded them. It was a shared resilience, a mutual recognition of the quiet dignity required to navigate a world that has been shattered. He didn't offer empty platitudes or clumsy words of comfort. Instead, when she finished speaking, he simply reached across the table and placed his hand gently over hers for a brief moment. The touch was warm, respectful, and profoundly comforting. It was a simple gesture that spoke volumes, a silent promise of understanding. The connection deepened. They were no longer just the maid and the billionaire, the sufferer and the savior. They were two broken souls who had found a kindred spirit in the most unlikely of circumstances. Two people beginning to heal. Their meetings at the small cafe became a regular ritual, a quiet sanctuary carved out of their disparate lives. Alistair never spoke of his wealth, introducing himself only as a businessman, and Alara never asked. The money was irrelevant to the bond they were forging, a bond built on shared grief and a blossoming, unspoken tenderness. He learned about Lily's love for drawing and her fascination with stars. She learned about his passion for classical music and his forgotten love for sailing. With each conversation, the ice around Alistair's heart continued to melt, and the perpetual weariness in Alara's eyes began to be replaced by a glimmer of hope. But their fragile new world was on a collision course with the harsh reality of Alara's employment. Mrs. Deidre Blackwood was the chairwoman of the annual Starlight Charity Gala, the city's most exclusive and high-profile social event. It was a night for the city's elite to congratulate themselves on their generosity, a spectacle of gleaming jewels and forced smiles. Mrs. Blackwood, in an act of performative cruelty, decreed that all of her domestic staff were required to work the event as servers, a public display of their subservience. Alara dreaded it. The thought of being on display, serving champagne and canapés to the very people who represented the system that was crushing her, filled her with a quiet sense of humiliation. But she had no choice. To refuse would be to lose her job. The night of the gala arrived, a swirl of biting cold and flashing camera bulbs. The grand ballroom of the city's most stately hotel was a cavernous space, dripping with crystal chandeliers and ornate floral arrangements. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of self-important chatter. Alara, dressed in a stark black and white uniform, moved silently through the crowd, her tray held steady, her face a mask of professional neutrality. She felt invisible, a nameless, faceless cog in the grand machine of the evening. She was serving a small group of guests when a man, a well-known city councilman, engaged her in polite conversation, asking a simple question about one of the auction items. Alara answered quietly and respectfully. From across the room, Mrs. Blackwood saw the exchange. A flash of irrational fury lit her eyes. How dare her maid fraternize with the guests? How dare she act as if she were anything more than a servant? This was her night, and Alara's quiet dignity was an affront to her authority. She waited for her moment, her cruelty coiling like a snake. Later in the evening, as the live auction was about to begin, Mrs. Blackwood ascended the stage, a microphone in her hand. A hush fell over the room, but instead of beginning the auction, she put a hand to her throat, her face a mask of theatrical panic. "My locket!" she gasped, her voice amplified throughout the silent ballroom. "My great-grandmother's diamond locket. It's gone." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Blackwood let the drama build before raising a trembling, accusatory finger, pointing directly at Alara, who stood frozen near the side of the room. "You!" she shrieked. "The maid! I saw you near my private dressing room earlier. You stole it." The accusation, sharp and venomous, echoed in the cavernous space. Every eye in the room turned to Alara. She felt the weight of 100 pairs of judgmental eyes, the heat of their suspicion a physical blow. Her face went pale, but she held her ground, her back straight, her chin high. "Mrs. Blackwood, she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I would never—" "Silence!" the older woman screeched, savoring her moment of power. "You people are all the same. You see something shiny, and you can't help yourselves. I am firing you, of course, and I'm calling the police." Security. 2 burly security guards began to move towards Alara. She was trapped, humiliated, her reputation being shattered in front of the city's most powerful people. Tears of helpless frustration glistened in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Deidre Blackwood that satisfaction. Total silence descended. Just as the guards reached for her arm, a calm, commanding voice cut through the tension from the back of the room. "That will not be necessary." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Alistair Sterling strode forward. He moved with an unhurried, powerful grace, his presence instantly shifting the entire atmosphere of the room. He was not just a guest, he was the center of gravity. He stopped directly in front of the stage, his cool, unwavering gaze fixed on Mrs. Blackwood. A gasp went through the crowd. Everyone knew who he was. Alistair Sterling, the reclusive, almost mythical billionaire, the primary benefactor of this very charity. "Mr. Sterling," Mrs. Blackwood stammered, her face losing its color. I didn't realize you were here." "Clearly," Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned his gaze to Alara, and for a moment, all the cold power in his expression softened into one of profound tenderness and protection. He then looked back at the stunned hostess. "I have known Alara Jensen for some time now," he announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "She is a person of more integrity, dignity, and honor than anyone in this room. The idea that she would steal anything is not just absurd. It is a slander of the highest order." He took another step towards the stage. "And as for your locket, Deidre," he said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, "perhaps you should check the clasp of your own clutch, the one you placed on your dressing table not 20 minutes ago. I imagine you'll find the locket became caught on the silk lining when you misplaced it." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes widened in horror. She fumbled with her purse, her hands trembling. With a soft click, she opened it, and there, tangled in the lining, was the gleaming diamond locket. The crowd let out a collective gasp. The humiliation was total, the power dynamic seismically and irrevocably reversed. Alistair Sterling had not just defended a maid. He had publicly destroyed her accuser with surgical precision. He had performed a heroic public salvation. The antagonist was left speechless. Alistair turned his back on the utterly ruined Deirdre Blackwood, dismissing her as if she were a speck of dust. The vast ballroom remained in a state of stunned, absolute silence. He walked over to Alara, who was still standing frozen, her mind struggling to process the cataclysmic shift that had just occurred. The man she knew from the quiet cafe, the gentle, grieving soul who shared tea with her, was Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling, the most powerful, enigmatic man in the city. He stopped in front of her, his eyes searching hers, full of a raw, unspoken emotion. He gently took the serving tray from her trembling hands and placed it on a nearby table. "Your work here is done," he said, his voice soft but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. The finality in his tone was absolute. He was not just ending her shift, he was ending her life of servitude. He then offered her his arm. "But your work with me," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "is just beginning." Disbelief, shock, and a fragile, burgeoning hope swirled within Alara. Without a word, she placed her hand on his arm, felt strong, steady, and safe. Together, they turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a scene of social carnage and a crowd of whispering, astonished elites. He led her through the hotel lobby and out into the crisp night air, where a sleek, black car with a driver was waiting. He helped her inside, the door closing with a soft, expensive click that seemed to shut out the entire world. They drove in silence through the snow-dusted streets, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. Alara stared out the window, her reflection a stranger to her now. Who was she, to be sitting in this gleaming car beside this commanding man? It felt like a dream, a beautiful, impossible dream from which she was terrified of waking. The car pulled into a private, underground garage and came to a stop. Alistair led her to a private elevator, which ascended silently, opening directly into the most breathtaking apartment she had ever seen. It was a penthouse, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, godlike view of the entire city. The space was vast, modern, and filled with tasteful, priceless art. Yet it felt warm and inviting, not sterile like the Blackwood mansion. An amber hue from soft, recessed lighting filled the room. He led her to a plush sofa and then went to the kitchen, returning moments later with 2 cups of steaming tea, a quiet, familiar gesture that grounded her in the midst of the surreal opulence. He sat down not across from her, but beside her, creating a sense of intimacy and equality. "Alara," he began, his voice laced with a tender vulnerability she had never heard from him before. "I owe you an apology. I should have told you who I was." She shook her head. "No. I don't understand any of this." He set his tea down and turned to face her fully, taking both of her hands in his. "It started that day in the park," he confessed, his eyes holding hers. "Your daughter. She saved me. For years, I was living in a gray, meaningless world, just going through the motions. Her simple, pure act of kindness was like the sun breaking through the clouds. It reminded me that there was still goodness, still light in the world." He paused, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "I had to find you. I had to know the woman who could raise a child with such a beautiful heart in the face of so much hardship. And when I found you, when we started talking, I saw that same light in you, your strength, your dignity, your unwavering kindness. I've been falling in love with you since the moment we first spoke." Alara gasped, her heart thudding wildly against her ribs. Love. It was a word she thought had been buried forever with Mark. And yet, hearing it from this incredible man, it felt undeniably, terrifyingly real. "I want to give you and Lily everything," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just security, not just wealth. I want to give you a life filled with peace and joy and love. I have a philanthropic foundation dedicated to helping families who have been crushed by medical debt. I want you to run it, not as an employee but as my partner. To use your compassion and your strength to help others, just as you helped me." Tears finally welled in Alara's eyes. But this time, they were not tears of sorrow or humiliation. They were tears of cathartic release, of disbelief, of a profound and overwhelming hope. After a lifetime of suffering, salvation had arrived, not just in the form of financial security, but in the form of a man who saw her, who valued her, who loved her. She could only nod, a sob of pure, unadulterated joy catching in her throat. He gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Alara Jensen," he whispered, his voice cracking, "will you let me be your family?" In the quiet of the penthouse, high above the sleeping city, she found her voice. "Yes," she whispered back. Yes, it was the beginning of everything. 1 year later, the golden glow of the late afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of a stately but comfortable home, illuminating the soft specks of dust dancing in the air. The house was not the sterile, cavernous penthouse, nor the cold, imposing mansion of Deidre Blackwood. It was a home, filled with the sounds of laughter, the scent of baking cookies, and the vibrant chaos of a happy family. Alara stood by the fireplace, a gentle, serene smile on her face. The weary, hollow-eyed woman of a year ago was gone, replaced by a confident, radiant woman whose eyes shone with love and purpose. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a creator of hope. As the head of the Sterling Jensen Foundation, she had revolutionized philanthropic work in the city, implementing programs with a compassion and understanding that could only come from someone who had lived the desperation her clients now faced. She had helped hundreds of families, transforming her own past suffering into a powerful force for good. Lily, now 6 years old, sat on the plush rug, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she drew with a set of new crayons. She was a happy, secure child, free from the anxieties of poverty that had clouded her early years. Her laughter, frequent and uninhibited, was the most beautiful music in the house. Alistair entered the room, carrying a small tray with 3 cups of hot chocolate. The commanding, grief-haunted billionaire was also gone, replaced by a man whose face was relaxed and open, the deep lines of sorrow softened by a constant, quiet joy. He looked at Alara and Lily, and his heart swelled with a love so profound it was almost painful. They had not just healed him, they had remade him. He set the tray down and knelt beside his daughter, admiring her artwork. "What are you drawing, my little star?" he asked, his voice filled with affection. Lily held up her picture. It was a drawing of the 3 of them, stick figures holding hands under a giant, smiling yellow sun. "It's us," she said proudly. A family. Alistair's eyes glistened. He kissed the top of her head and then looked up at Alara, his gaze conveying a universe of unspoken love and gratitude. She smiled back, a perfect, silent communication passing between them. Above the fireplace, in a simple yet elegant golden frame, hung a small, slightly crumpled piece of paper. It was Lily's drawing of the 100 kindness coin. It was the most valuable object in the entire house, the sacred relic of their beginning. It was a constant reminder that their incredible life together, their profound happiness, had all been born from a single, selfless act of kindness in a cold, lonely park. It was a testament to the fact that the purest currency in the world isn't money, but love. And in that, they were the wealthiest people on earth. Their happily ever after was not an ending, but a beautiful, ongoing chapter of peace, security, and a deep, abiding love. This story, at its core, is a simple fable about the immense and often unseen power of a single selfless act. It serves as a testament to the idea that true wealth is not measured by the contents of a bank account, but by the capacity of one's heart for kindness and empathy. Alara, in her state of dignified desperation, possessed a fortune that the billionaire Alistair, in all his material splendor, had lost. She was rich in spirit, in virtue, and in the unwavering belief that compassion was a currency that could heal any wound. Her daughter, Lily, became the agent of this profound truth, her innocent gesture of offering a hand-drawn kindness coin, acting as the catalyst for a seismic shift in 2 lonely worlds. The crayon drawing, dismissed as worthless by the transactional logic of society, became the most valuable asset of all, for it purchased something money never could, the reawakening of a shattered human soul. Alistair's journey from a state of cynical, grief-stricken isolation to one of renewed purpose and love illustrates a powerful redemption arc. He was saved not by his own power or wealth, but by the unsolicited, pure-hearted charity of a stranger who expected nothing in return. His grand, public salvation of Alara was merely a reflection, a paying forward of the much quieter, more profound salvation she had offered him on that cold day in the park. Their union symbolizes the merging of material resource with moral purpose, creating a force for good that ripples outward, healing the very societal wounds of poverty and indifference that had caused Alara so much suffering. It is a narrative that champions the quiet, the gentle, and the dignified, suggesting that the most powerful forces for change in the world are often the most unassuming. If this story touched your heart, it's because it speaks to a universal truth we all carry within us. The deep-seated knowledge that our connections to one another are what give our lives meaning. It reminds us that behind every face, whether it be a weary maid or a powerful billionaire, lies a human story filled with its own unique sorrows and the potential for incredible resilience. The journey of Alara and Alistair is a reminder that we are all, in our own ways, both the sufferer and the savior, capable of both receiving and giving the grace that can transform a life in an instant. It is a call to look past the superficial markers of success and status, and to see the true value that resides in every individual's capacity for love. We invite you to carry the spirit of this story with you. Let it inspire you to perform your own small acts of kindness, to offer your own kindness coins to the strangers you meet, for you never know when such a simple gesture might be the miracle that saves a soul. For more soul-stirring tales that celebrate the power of the human heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. We'll see you in the next one.